Darkness Dwells is brought to you by Crystal Lake Publishing. Go to crystallakepub.com and go check out what they've got going. They've been publishing since 2012, and they are only getting bigger. They have published the likes of Ramsey Campbell, Mercedes Yardley, and Clive Barker, amongst many more. We're also supported by audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/darknessdwells and pick out any book that you want when you sign up for a free trial membership. And that trial lasts for 1 month and you get any book you want for free. So go and check that out. Welcome to the Darkness Dwells podcast, episode 119. I am your host, Jason White, and Michael, he won't be joining us for this episode because he's going through some stuff, let's just say that. One of them being his computer has died. It seems like the universe is picking on Michael these days. So let's all hope that Michael comes out of it just okay, and he will be back in the future. So for episode 119 here, I am going alone, and so I have an interview with Douglas Wynne, and we're going to talk about his SPECTRA files, and then I thought it would be neat to do a top 5 list, and since the SPECTRA files are cosmic horror, more so, I guess, Lovecraftian horror. Well, Lovecraftian horror is cosmic horror, of course, but I am going to do top 5 lists of cosmic horror movies, and I decided to go with that because we here at Darkness Dwells always discuss literature and movies in the horror realm, and we like to discuss all types of horror. But as you guys may well know, if you know me at all, I absolutely love my cosmic horror. So there's nothing really to update on anyone on. I'm going to cut this intro off here, and we're going to take a quick break. When we return, I'm going to be joined with Douglas Wynne. And right after that, we are going to do the top 5 cosmic horror movies presented by Darkness Dwells. Stay tuned. Welcome back. As promised, we have an awesome guest this week. Douglas Wynne joins us, and he wrote his first dark fantasy novel at the age of 15, but took a creative detour soon after to spend the next decade writing songs and singing in a rock band, or in rock bands. After earning his BA in music production and engineering at Berklee College of Music and working a short stint as a recording engineer in Woodstock, New York, he came full circle back to fiction writing and is recently the author of 5 novels, including The Devil of Echo Lake, Steel Breeze, and the SPECTRA Files trilogy, which is Red Equinox, Black January, and Cthulhu Blues. Short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies, and his writing workshops have been featured in genre conventions and other venues throughout New England. He lives in Massachusetts with his wife and son, and a house full of animals. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Hey, Jason. Thanks so much for having me on.
No problem. I'm a pretty big music fan, and so I found it interesting that you were in bands yourself. Your bio says that you sang. I'm pretty sure I've seen a picture of you with a guitar. Did you also play guitar?
Yeah, right. I'm primarily a guitar player. So sure, I've done the singer-songwriter thing, played mostly rhythm guitar in bands in addition to singing. And I dabble in other instruments and multi-track recording, which was kind of the thing I was doing before getting serious about writing, like you said in your intro there.
Okay, so how many bands have you been in?
There was one that was sort of my main effort in rock and roll. One band of guys that I met when I was at Berkeley, and we were all into the same sort of prog rock and hard rock. So it's funny to me that years later, the friendships from that band have been the enduring thing, not the music. But in high school I was in a couple of bands, and again I've done the solo acoustic thing as well. So these days, mostly play guitar to relax, and my son's really interested in music and classic rock, and I'm making sure that he's not at all hip for his own generation. He's a huge fan of the Beatles and Zeppelin and all that. So he plays bass and flute and stuff. So I typically pick up an instrument now if I'm gonna help him learn something. So that's fun. It's become more for fun.
Oh, that's cool. I was wondering, as a music fan myself, I did play guitar and that, but I never really took it seriously, not quite like you did. But as a music fan to a music fan, I was just wondering, what are your favorite bands? Some of them anyway.
Pink Floyd above all others for me. I also just love a lot of the 70s era epic prog rock, old Genesis, Rush, The Who, and in the more modern incarnation of progressive rock, bands like Tool, Ghost, Steven Wilson, and Porcupine Tree. I think some of that is just the new incarnation of stuff that I grew up listening to, that I think is breaking some new ground also, and incorporating electronic sounds. And when I have time for music, it's still that sort of thing mostly. But I'm also a folk rock fan, so I grew up with a lot of stuff like Crosby, Stills and Nash, Joni Mitchell, and Frank Turner these days. I think is brilliant in that area.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now you mentioned Tool. Being a Tool fan can be quite difficult because you have to wait.
Right, you need a lot of patience. It's like being a writer. Yeah. A lot of patience.
So I was wondering if you checked out their latest album and what you thought of it.
Yeah, I did. I've been listening to that mowing the lawn, and I'm still in that phase where I'm getting into it, and it takes, I think for complex music, it takes time for it to get under your skin, and where they've got, a lot of their vocal tracks are kind of, tucked into the clouds of the music. It takes a while to tease out the lyrics, to get a sense of, what are not always the most obvious melodic hooks. So, I'm falling for it a little at a time. When I first heard it, I thought, well, this is definitely on brand. It sounds, there's only one band that sounds like this. And I was worried that it might be a little bit too much of them, taking a page from the old playbook. But digging in a little deeper, it really sounds to me like some of their most high caliber musicianship that I've ever heard them. The rhythms on this thing are just killing me, and the textures are amazing. So far I'm really liking it. It seems to lack some of the humor that I also dig in their older stuff. It seems like more of a serious spiritual record, but there's room for that too. I like it when they do that. Yeah,
and I find it's not quite as heavy. I like to think of Tool as sort of like a band that represents a human life and the certain stages you go through in human life. And I think that this album sort of represents middle age to maybe getting older.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Lyrically, it seems to reference that pretty
yeah, it references that in the lyrics, but you can hear it in the music too,
Yeah, they're maturing.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
And they're not maturing in that bad way, where the band just kind of sucks now, because they're not into it anymore.
Yeah, I hope I get to catch them live. I'm not sure if that'll happen, but it's always a great show.
Yeah. Now, I chuckled a little bit because when I was reading Red Equinox, the main character, Becca Phillips, she's wearing her favorite, and I say favorite with the quotation marks in the air, her favorite Tool shirt. And I had to laugh because I always had my favorite Tool shirt.
Cool.
And I believe it was brought up again in Black January. I'm not too sure, but
Yeah.
But I love that about Red Equinox. It mentions bands like Tool, and it has sort of a gothic sense about it.
Cool. Yeah, she is a fan, and I think some of her mental health issues, tie into the catharsis that she gets out of dark, intense music. So I definitely wanted to reference that. I listened to a ton of Tool, getting into her character. So, glad you caught that.
Did you start writing, when you started writing at Equinox, did you have it set that it was going to be a trilogy, or did the story just kind of grow as you were working on it?
I knew that it might be. My publisher at the time was asking if I wanted to do a series, and I wasn't sure because, it sounded nice in theory, but I don't do a lot of outlining. I do it more of it these days, but I come from the seat of your pants school of writing where you figure it out as you go, and so I didn't know, having not written any kind of series before, whether or not that would require planning ahead much. So I wrote what I wanted to be a satisfying standalone story for Red Equinox, that it would come to a conclusion but leave the door open for more, so that I wasn't going to let anybody down if I couldn't deliver on additional books, but I knew I had a way forward to at least try that, and so it even though I didn't have an overarching plan when I wrote the first book, I did find ways to tell new stories in that world and to kind of have an overriding arc in the same way that a single book, even though I don't plan it, it finds its ending. But with a single book, I can go back and revise after I've learned what the hell I'm doing, right? Before anybody sees it, knowing that there's a book out there that's already in print, and you can't go back and change that. You've got to live with whatever decisions you made. That kind of raises the stakes. But I kind of knew it would be a trilogy. At one point, I thought it might be 4, but 3 ended up being, what it needed to be.
I was wondering how the genesis for this story came to be. Like, how did you create SPECTRA?
SPECTRA came out of just my interest in intelligence agencies. I'm fascinated by not exactly conspiracy theories, but I read a lot of news about the sort of behind the scenes machinations of how government works when it's trying to keep its secrets. And what I found really weird during the Bush presidency with the war on terror was how much of that became mainstream knowledge. You would see like logos for secret intel agencies like PRISM, like they were branding themselves or something. That just struck me as kind of odd. But having been long fascinated by the CIA and stories related to organizations like that, I thought that the Lovecraft angle would fun. Obviously, I'm not the first to do this. There's Delta Green. There's the Laundry Files, but I thought that the fears being stoked by the war on terror had a lot of connectivity to Lovecraft's xenophobia, and that there would be a way to have this sort of government agency pulling the strings, not necessarily the good guys, but the self-proclaimed good guys, and that my real heroes could be kind of caught in the crossfire between an agency like that and dark cults with their own apocalyptic agendas. To me, that was the interesting tension in the story. But the genesis of it, I think, really just came from wanting to write a Lovecraftian novel, but wanting to also play against a lot of of his own tendencies and tropes, I thought that would either be a disaster or it would be fun to take the things that are typical of his work and kind of see how much I could stretch against that. Like, the pace of a thriller, can that be done with the atmospheric, tension of weird fiction? Can I do something with diverse characters and a female lead when in his own work there's a real absence of that, to say the least. So I had a list of things that I knew I didn't want to do. I had a list of things I wanted to try that I felt hadn't really been done a lot in the Cthulhu mythos world. So just sort of, a mad experiment.
Yeah. You mentioned being a writer, that when you write by the seat of your pants. And for this, you dabbled with preparing it and knowing where the plot's going to go. Did you find that a struggle?
It was the plots were largely improvised, but I tend to plan like in thirds. It's not necessarily that I'm writing 3-act structures, but with my premise, I can get about a third into a book, about 30,000 words in, and then I'll usually have, and this is not just the Spectre Files, but standalone novels also. I tend to find that at about that point in the story, I need to forecast a little bit, and I'll make lists of, what if this happens next, what if that, and run through a lot of options. Where might they lead me? Trying to find unexpected possibilities, trying to find things that emerge from character motive mainly, so that it has an organic kind of growth. But then I'll do it again another third into the book, when I hit about 60,000 words. I'll start kind of planning ahead possibilities, not very fleshed out. And often as I'm writing those scenes, I discover things and it changes again. But what I did find challenging is that when I went back to write the prequel to this trilogy recently, I had to really fact check myself and get very much into reacquainting myself with what I'd already written in those books that come many years later, so that I could set up seeds that appear in the books that had already been published, without contradicting, and screwing all that up. So that was probably the toughest part.
When you're trying to follow the plan, I like the idea that you mentioned. You'll get about 30,000 words, and then you'll start asking questions of where it can go. It seems to me like even though you're not necessarily writing by the seat of your pants, you still are in a way. You like keeping it fresh. Is that correct?
Yeah, what I have found just for me personally is, and I know a lot of writers who don't plot say this, that if I know too much about what's going to happen, it sucks the energy out of the book for me, and I feel like I already know the story, so I'm less motivated, I'm less invested in telling it. It's just, I guess, the way I'm wired, that I need an element of discovery in the writing. And I often say that, for me, writing doesn't, ideas don't lead to writing. Writing leads to ideas. Ideas emerge from the writing. I discover, from exploring a scene or a character, I discover what my possibilities are for the next thing. So, it doesn't work for everybody. And I have some ideas that I know I'm going to have to, there have been ideas I've had to research a lot, but I know I also have some ideas for stories that I'm going to probably have to plan more than usual, just for structural reasons and to save myself tons of revision. So, it kind of depends on what the book needs. Whatever the current project needs to succeed, I'll adapt to.
Yeah. One thing I really enjoy about your books is that you have a diversity within the characters, especially in regards to mental illness, with depression and SAD mostly. Is there a conscious reason for this?
Yeah, there are a few. With Red Equinox, you mentioned Becca having seasonal affective disorder. She struggles with depression. Probably the simplest reason that's in there is, in approaching Lovecraft, you're also approaching a body of work that deals with topics, of insanity and the idea that, if the facts of the cosmos were really assimilated by the human mind, that would break the human mind, that, you can't confront some of these things and leave with your sanity intact. So I wanted to take a character who was already broken, and I thought that, and it'd be fun to surmise that maybe she's better equipped to deal with this than someone who has a rosy view of their place in the universe. Her family has dark secrets. She's been exposed to some things when she was young that were mind shattering. Maybe she might have some biological predisposition toward depression. But I think when you talk to people who struggle with mental health, sometimes the idea comes up that if your eyes are open, if you're looking at the state of the world, is it possible to not be depressed? Sometimes when you consider things like climate change, which plays into red equinox, without even taking monstrous gods into account, trying to see these things clear-eyed, can be a real struggle. The other thing about Becca, though, is that she's a photographer, and she first discovers that there are these transdimensional monsters seeping into our world through her use of infrared art photography. So I liked symbolically playing with the idea that my main character is someone who processes the world around her in terms of light and dark. She's affected by the seasons. She's, as a photographer, viewing things in terms of light and shadow, and then she gets this window into another world through other parts of the non-visible spectrum. So that gave me a variety of ways to approach her that I hope make her a more complex and interesting person. And part of that comes out of her being the first female lead that I wrote in a novel, and I really didn't want to fuck that up. So my wife has dealt with seasonal affective disorder, and I knew that even though I think of Becca as a very discrete personality, I don't think of Jen when I write Becca. But I knew that if I could bring to it things I've learned from many years with someone I admire, and their the struggles they deal with, that would inform the work and hopefully make it more real. And I thought it was also fun to have a hero who's trying to save the world, but on a good day she has trouble getting out of bed. So that presents its own challenges for a writer, but I felt like it might make her more real and relatable.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed those aspects because I suffer from those myself, and I don't like saying I suffer. I like saying I have it, and and one thing I really liked is how aware she is of the time of year, because she knows that it's getting darker now, and she's not going to be feeling very well. She's just going to want to sleep, and I appreciated that because it's like you nailed it.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. You mentioned themes like climate change and also things with depression and how it connected with cosmic horror. Mm-hmm. Is this like something you have as an idea before you start writing your books, or do you draw it out in later drafts, these themes?
It varies again depending on the book. There are things that sometimes I'll have an idea, and this is why I love the fact that so much of writing is revision, is because you're not going to have all of your ideas or all of your best ideas in the first pass. So it's almost like overdubbing in music. You discover this little melodic lick that just fits in, that happens late in the process, or you're muting things. You're in the case of fiction, cutting things out to tighten things up and make space to highlight other things that you've left behind. I'm ranting now, but I've always seen that sort of parallel in those two creative processes, mixing music and revising fiction. And for the book I'm currently writing, I recently, and this has been through so many drafts, I thought it was long ago done and polished, but I thought of I noticed something recently in my environment that made me think, oh, that totally belongs in the book, and it's going to highlight a symbolic thing that's already in the book. So it can come late. But in the case of the climate change stuff, I knew I wanted to tackle that as a major theme of the SPECTRA Files trilogy, especially the first book, where Boston is post-hurricane flood. So, I don't want to write allegory. I don't want to beat anyone over the head with themes or politics, but I do know that if I'm dealing with a certain story idea that I'm excited about because it's a juxtaposition of elements I like in horror or elements I like in thrillers with things that interest me in the real world, things that I know I have, thoughts about and things I want to explore, then that's usually part of the initial premise.
Yeah. Despite the themes, Red Equinox is just plain a lot of fun to read too. The action in it is just awesome. I really loved the subway scene.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for writing it. How do you approach writing action without, I find that a lot of action can be bogged down with too much description as to what's going on. But I found with your book, it was almost just the right balance where my imagination latched straight onto all the action. So how do you approach writing action without bogging the reader down with too much description?
It's nice to hear that because I have my own doubts about the effectiveness of what I'm trying to do. I have struggled a little bit with how much description is enough, how much is too much, and it's one of those challenges in a Lovecraftian thriller that I think was central. Is I didn't want to write in Lovecraftian language, but I did want to bring my own moments of poetic language to the story. Because you're trying to, describe the indescribable and trying to create these almost psychedelic moments of supernatural horror. But yes, I wanted it to have action. I wanted it to have the pace of a spy thriller. So that balance is tricky. I like to think in terms of cinema for writing action, where you might have a lot of short, quick cuts. And if there's too much of that, it gets disorienting, and I lose interest when these superhero movies get just way too overstimulating. I'm riveted if there's character tension and development and dialogue that's pulling me in. But then when the big CGI battles happen, I tend to kind of tune out a little. But I think if you're writing action and keeping the sentences pretty short and focused, that can create this sense of acceleration. But then you'll have what would in a film be sort of a moment of, brief slow-mo where you can zoom in on the details. Because people in crisis moments with their adrenaline flooding their system, I've done some workshops about this stuff and read some nonfiction about the neuropsychology of crisis, and you can see things with a very crisp, vivid, slowing down of time sort of perception in those heightened moments of jeopardy. So, yeah, I think trying to strike a balance between those things is the trick. But, you've got to be careful that in writing an action scene, someone isn't thinking in flowery metaphors because, we don't think that way when we're getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
So I'm always working to get better at that.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned time and how it shifts. It actually does shift because time is a perception, really.
Right.
And so it things slow down and things speed up. Like when something bad happens, it can either some people say I swear to God, everything slowed down, or some people is I don't even know what happened because it all moved so fast.
Sure. Yeah, there can be gaps in memory after things like that. Yeah. I remember reading in there's a great book that I've used in some of my workshops. It's called The Unthinkable. Amanda, I don't have a note right here to tell you who the author is, but she interviewed a lot of people who had been in disasters and terror events like 9/11 and plane crashes she interviewed police who have been involved in shootings. And there's this one interview she did with a cop who had been in a convenience store shooting, and that he was being shot at, and he was returning fire. And in the midst of it, he starts thinking, what are these beer cans? Someone's throwing beer cans in my peripheral vision. And it was the empty shells from his own weapon exiting. But it's, that kind of the brain just honing in on a detail and making it larger than life.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting example of that. Yeah, the brain is doing its best in duress.
That's awesome. So you mentioned Lovecraft, and obviously these books are very Lovecraftian. So I was wondering, have you been a fan of Lovecraft for a very long time, or is he new to you?
A long time. I as a teen, when I was discovering the fiction that still influences me, I was a huge Stephen King fan, but I was also looking to, like when you listen to a guitarist you like and you discover that his big influence is this other guy, and or this group of older players, the blues men who influenced David Gilmour, for example. Start listening to their stuff. Is what I was doing when I was like 15. I was checking out anyone that had influenced Stephen King that I could find: Lovecraft, Poe, Ray Bradbury. My grandmother gave me a big book of Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Mystery and Imagination that really sucked me in one summer. Mm-hmm. And I'd found some of Lovecraft's collected stories in cheap paperbacks and got hooked immediately on just the mad vision that he had. What I found in the language that can be at times overwrought, it had a kind of music to it that I later recognized in Clive Barker, who I feel does that in a more graceful and sophisticated way, but that the voice spoke to me in Lovecraft. So it took me a while to get back to that universe and to discover that there were modern writers who were playing with his mythos, and that was something you could do. So when I realized there was a community around that, it became very interesting to me to see what I could do with it.
Yeah, I love reading Lovecraftian horror, and that's how I was introduced to you, honestly, because I was watching, or not, well, you can watch it, but I was listening to on my cell phone the Lovecraft E-Zine when I heard you interviewed, and this is a couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And I immediately added your books, but I didn't read them until...
We all have those long TBR lists. Yeah. But yeah, that's a great podcast. Mike is an amazing supporter of the Lovecraft community.
Oh, yes.
I think they're on a bit of a hiatus right now, but yeah, what he has accomplished in a short time is really impressive. I really look forward to whatever's next.
Yeah. So the Lovecraft, getting back to the Lovecraftian aspect of your of this series, I found that really fun to read because you come across like some of the gods and some other aspects of Lovecraftian fiction, and but yet at the same time, I really found that these are your books. So how do you write within the Cthulhu mythos while keeping it yours?
I think part of that is the list that I started out with, where I knew there were things I wanted to do that would play against the standard approaches to Lovecraft. Even the kind of possibly flawed idea that a novel-length thriller would be a good thing to do in Lovecraftian fiction. When so much of his own work is very effective in shorter form, short stories, atmospheric stories that have a slower pace. But yeah, to try to people the stories with characters who I recognize, who I feel like other modern people and other artists and people who are kind of marginalized or just the people who have been drawn to Lovecraft. I think it's interesting that he was such a wasp and so he'd be horrified by some of the modern people who have embraced him so much and who have found this sort of outsider voice in him that speaks to them, and yet they are the embodiment of so much, sexually and racially. We're a real eclectic group. When you go to Necronomicon, it's great to be among, such a wonderful tribe of freaks who find something in common in his vision. And so I just felt like where his dialogue to me is an underdeveloped area, that's kind of a flat in his own work. If I could make interesting, complicated people who speak in a more convincing way, that would make it mine. That would you kind of can't help when you're if you're not trying to write a pastiche, an imitation of someone else's work. I think you can't help but be yourself and have your own voice if you've been writing for a while anyway. So anyway, I'm happy to hear that it does seem to come through that way.
Oh, for sure. So, being a longtime Lovecraftian fan, is that the reason why you chose to write Lovecraftian fiction?
Yeah, obviously it comes from a love of it and feeling like it's an area that I understand as a fan inside out. So I felt I could do something authentic there. Not to sound, I don't know, maybe it does sound crass or craven to consider the marketplace when you're looking at what you're going to spend a year of your time building. But I think any writer has to kind of assess where is the intersection between what I'm inspired to write, that I know I will be, writing from love of the material, and where might I hope to make contact with some interest in a readership actually wanting to have this thing that I'm going to put all this time into. So I knew that there was a thriving Lovecraftian subculture, and I knew that small presses were doing a lot with that. I was at a place in my own writing career and development where I had done a couple of standalone novels, and I wanted to write something that I knew I could market with a small press. I owed books to a small publisher, and I did want those to succeed. So I'm not going to write zombie fiction because I don't like zombie fiction. So that would be dishonest, I think, if I thought, oh well, there's dollars in zombie fiction. But I knew that the Lovecraftian fiction was one area that I would really get off on doing, and so yeah, that was something I figured there was a lot there to explore. You think about how many people have explored the Judeo-Christian mythology in horror fiction, and that still doesn't seem to be exhausted yet. So to take another mythology as the foundation for my own angles of approach, it looked like a big enough world that I could do a lot there. And now I'm trying to actually kind of move away from it a little bit. I've done a lot of short fiction in Lovecraftian circles, and in addition to the books, I feel like I originally did other things, and I want to do other things again, and not just be painted into a corner on it so much as I love it. I'm sure it will always be an influence.
Yeah. Do you ever think that cosmic horror or Lovecraftian fiction will ever become unpopular, or do you ever think it's going to maybe blow up, sort of like the zombie thing did or the vampire thing?
I don't know. It's a good question. Has it hit its peak? Maybe. I think it's a little Byzantine for maybe the level of accessibility that you see in zombie fiction, or vampires are such an embedded primary myth in our world that everybody gets it. You don't have to explain what a vampire is. You don't have to explain what a zombie is. The Lovecraftian thing, I think, takes a little bit more of an education to grapple with. You do see the themes of it crossing over into many kinds of stories that aren't really considered Lovecraftian. I think there's Lovecraftian material in a lot of stories about, sci-fi stories about alien contact. There's obviously occult horror in general. Occult horror at large has a lot of points of contact with Lovecraftian fiction. But the sort of Cthulhu brand horror, unless Guillermo del Toro makes a movie out of Red Equinox, fingers crossed. I don't know that we will ever see it really catch on in that way.
Yeah. Which is, I don't know, I kind of like it that way, honestly. I wanted to say which is unfortunate, I almost did. I guess, I kind of feel that way too. Because I would love to see a lot of really big budget Lovecraftian fiction make the big screen. But at the
Me too.
But at the same time, it would if it became really popular, it would be like the zombie thing. Because I used to love zombies until it became this huge thing and everyone's doing it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And
Oversaturated.
Yeah, I'm afraid of it becoming oversaturated. Right now, I think it's got its groove, but I would still love to see something big hit the big screen and something good at that. So
I was disappointed in Mountains of Madness.
Yes.
Fell
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
I felt like I saw a really great cosmic horror big budget production in It Chapter 2 recently, Stephen King adaptation. As much as I have my criticisms of that movie as a fan of the book, but to see cosmic horror done with that kind of budget was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I hear great things about The Color Out of Space, the new Richard Stanley movie. I really want to see that.
Yeah, I want to see that too.
Maybe it's coming.
Okay, to switch gears just a little bit, I saw on your website that you wrote Smoke and Dagger, the prequel novella that was released recently.
Yes.
That you wrote that on your cell phone using this neat little Bluetooth keyboard. I have two questions regarding this keyboard.
Sure.
First question, do you still use it? And second question, where do you get that?
So the keyboard you're talking about is the model is Penna, Penna. I forget the name of the company that made it. It was a Kickstarter. You can find them on Amazon, but they're a bit pricey. And I got a good deal on one a couple of years ago on eBay. So you can look for them there. It's a retro typewriter style keyboard. But it has the cherry key switches, so it's got a very nice responsivity. It's very cool tactile, clackety kind of keyboard. But it's a metal, housing for the keys, and has that neat little pocket for your phone or tablet or whatever. So with the Bluetooth signal, you've got a great keyboard there that's pretty portable, and whatever writing software you're already using, you can probably connect it to. I do use it depending on the project and where I'm writing, when I'm writing. I'll use anything. I'll write with a pen. I'll write with. I love my Logitech Bluetooth keyboard. That's very simple, but just feels good. I'm not a great typist, but the built-in keyboard on the laptop drives me crazy. I can't be at all accurate with that. Whatever I need to get the words in, I'll use. But it is fun sometimes, just like with listening to certain music when you're writing music that's going to fit the mood of what you're writing. I think the right tools can give you a proper mindset. I have favorite pens. I have favorite kinds of notebooks that I like to use. My first novel was written in 3 large format journal notebooks by hand. So when you don't have deadlines, you can get away with that.
Yeah. You bring up music again. That had me interested in it. I picture you creating a lot of playlists for different projects. Do you do that?
Yeah, I usually, if I'm doing a novel, there's usually a playlist, a pretty long playlist, that it's another stupid writer trick for training your brain to. So it's hard enough to find the discipline to carve out space in the busy, overstimulated, highly distracted lives we live, and especially if you have a family, a day job like most writers, anything that'll help get you into the zone is worth trying to benefit from. So I think if you've got music that you've been listening to each day that you're writing, for some people I write at the same time of day each day. If you can do it, great. You train your brain to be imaginative, to be productive at a certain time. And since I can't do that, I have to kind of find times. The music will often be one way of getting into that groove and getting into the mindset I was in yesterday when I was writing, the same story. The last novel I wrote that I'm currently shopping, the soundtrack was mostly one David Bowie song over and over and over again. There was a little bit of Trent Reznor instrumental stuff, but yeah, I mostly kept going back to this one track from Outside by Bowie and Eno. So whatever.
Cool.
whatever works.
Now, I kind of read this series a little bit out of order. I put Smoke and Dagger in the middle because I wanted to
Okay.
cram it all in before the interview here. So I
I
read.
really appreciate you doing your homework. Thanks.
No problem. I had a lot of fun reading it. So I read Red Equinox first, and then I read Smoke and Dagger, and then I read Black January. And the funny thing is, I didn't even know Cthulhu Blues was the third in the trilogy proper.
Okay.
Until I went to do some investigating. I thought it was a collection of short stories. And I was
Okay.
like,
Yeah,
oh no, it's
it
part
could
three.
maybe look that way.
And I tried to cram that one in too, but I just couldn't make the time for it. But I will be getting to it soon. But
Thanks.
Smoke and Dagger is the prequel, and that's important to know. It takes place like 70 years before the trilogy, the Red Equinox trilogy, or the SPECTRA series. But I was wondering, because Smoke and Dagger itself really felt like it could be expanded. Definitely could be expanded. Excuse me, are there going to be continuations of this book or of that book as well?
Um, I don't have specific plans yet, but I'm very aware that there there's a 70-year gap between the prequel events of Smoke and Dagger, which focus on Catherine Littlefield, who is the grandmother of Becca Phillips in the trilogy. There, I've answered some questions about the origins of the Spectre files in Smoke and Dagger, but I know there's a lot of things I haven't answered or addressed yet, and which ones I might zoom in on eventually. I have some ideas. I can't say that, there's going to be, Smoke and Dagger is the first of a prequel trilogy. I don't know that, but I know there are more stories to tell involving Catherine, and it was fun. It was fun writing a historical novel. I kind of call it a novella, but it's a short novel. So there may be other maybe short stories or novellas, probably that fill in some of those gaps. Yes.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Catherine Littlefield is an interesting character because you could almost say it's not really her ghost. It's kind of like her ghost sort of haunts the trilogy.
Right.
She's not remembered very fondly by Becca, for example, but when we meet her in this series, in Smoke and Daggers, she's a very likable character. So you can tell she goes through some serious shit.
Yeah, I'm glad
destroys
that.
her.
Okay, I'm glad you pick it up that way. Right, Becca, as often is the case with family and with the people who raise us, because Becca was raised largely by her grandmother. She has complicated feelings about her. She loves her, she admires her, but there's a lot that she judges her for also. And in Smoke and Dagger, we meet Catherine as a college student in the 1940s. She's ambitious, she's smart, she's brave, but she still has a certain amount of innocence, kind of because she hasn't yet had opportunities to discover the kinds of arcane knowledge that she's always been thirsty for. And what we know from how her granddaughter will look back on her someday. You know what they say about power corrupting. I think that the drive for the dark arts, it led to some bad decisions on her part, and she tries, I think, to redeem herself before the end of her life. But yeah, she's a complicated person. It makes her fun to write about at different points in her life. So I do think I'll revisit her at some point.
You make some interesting correlations between occultism and science, I found. And it's a good thing. It's an interesting thing you do that, because I think there is a connection, especially in the fact that you decided to fictionalize a real person for Smoke and Dagger, and that's Jack Parsons. And
Right.
there's an interesting quote from him, and it's kind of long, but I'm going to try to read it here. And he says, "Well, I used to think we were most likely to encounter alien intelligence out there among the stars, but my occult studies have convinced me we may not need rocket fuel at all. There are preternatural entities among us already if we can open our perception to commune with them. There could be even one in this room with us right now, hidden between the atoms in the air between us, visible among another plane, waiting for us to invite it in." So this science versus occultism, there's already even some science to this with theoretical physics, speculating about alternative dimensions and whatnot. Do you think that there's any possibility to there being preternatural beings existing between the atoms?
It's a fun idea to play with in fiction. It's a central tenet of Lovecraftian fiction. I try not to talk too much about things that I don't have an education in, like physics, but I'm aware that there's a lot of interesting stuff there that has inspired science fiction and horror fiction, multiple worlds theories and parallel universes, this kind of thing. Jack Parsons, being both occultist and an occultist and a scientist, is one in a long line of people like Isaac Newton, who was into alchemy. We go back far enough, and science and magic are really indistinguishable. They're very intertwined. So that's interesting to me, to write about a character who just screamed to be a part of the SPECTRA files, because he was doing top secret government work after World War II. He lost his security clearance because of his social circles being just full of science fiction writers and maybe communists. It was the McCarthy era, and certainly this strange religious cult founded by Aleister Crowley that Parsons became involved in California. So he was really just custom made for the kinds of books that I write. Mm-hmm. But I'm evading your question, which is, do I believe this shit? I think it's really interesting that contact with higher intelligences is one of the central, maybe the central question of every major religion, every major mythology in human history. I'm also super skeptical of shows like Ancient Aliens, because they throw scientific method out the window, at the first commercial break. Yeah. But nonetheless, I'm interested in the subject because I think there must be something to explain things like the alien abduction phenomenon. I don't necessarily believe that we have creatures coming via faster than light travel to invade the Earth, but we're seeing now in mainstream news in the New York Times, we've got the Navy admitting that they've got these videos of aerial objects behaving in ways they don't understand. They don't know what it is. Yeah. So I've been very interested in the idea of transdimensional entities, that this, may be an explanation for what people have considered angels, demons, pick your term of choice depending on the belief system you're looking at. There's a really cool book that I kind of discovered as a Tool fan, because they're interested in this stuff too, called The Spirit Molecule, which is about DMT and about how people under the influence of powerful psychedelics often have very profound contact experiences with what they perceive as these higher intelligences, these kind of allies. There's a long tradition of shamanism that documents exactly that. So I think we don't understand it yet, but it's an area that's finally getting some real scientific attention. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that.
And that book you mentioned is called Spirit Molecule?
The Spirit Molecule. I don't recall the author's name, but it might be DMT, The Spirit Molecule.
Okay. I'd definitely check that out, because I'm interested in this stuff too, but it's really hard to... It's hard to find the stuff that's not bullshit, because there's so much bullshit out there. It's easy. It's almost too easy to fall into that territory of bullshit between and reality.
So much of it is speculative, but that's why for me it's best explored in fiction. But there's a lot of food for thought there. I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to Lovecraft, and I'm also a fan of all this psychedelic music and science fiction, is that Lovecraft is the horror equivalent of the psychedelic experience. The idea that your place in the universe may be insignificant, for the psychonauts of the 1960s, that was the liberating thing about it, was the idea that maybe my ego, doesn't matter. Maybe the universe is much bigger and more strange and beautiful than that. They found freedom in that idea, and without even the psychedelic theme, you look at someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson popularizing astrophysics, and as a humanist, as a non-religious person, this is someone who's also saying, look, there's profound beauty in this idea that we're part of something so big that it makes us insignificant. For Lovecraft, that's terrifying. That's the cause of deep fear and paranoia. What if my race doesn't make me special? What if I'm insignificant in the face of this tide of immigrants coming into my country? What if my place in the universe as a human is insignificant? There's these creatures to whom I'm a speck of dust. He gets the bad trip out of that.
That's very well said. Honestly, I couldn't say it any better. And Smoke Dagger, both the ebook and the physical book come with some really cool illustrations with some of the monsters and the gods and all that. I was wondering if you could talk about that for a little bit. The artist, who's the artist, and how did this come about? Because not too many books are illustrated, so something has to spark the interest in doing so.
Yeah, this kind of evolved backwards in that regard. Mat Fitzsimmons, Mat with one T, is the artist who illustrated Smoke Dagger, and he's largely responsible for the project existing at all. He had read the SPECTRA Files trilogy, and he's been working as an illustrator and graphic artist in a number of areas for a long time. He's also a singer in a hard rock band. Anyway, he had done his own fan art of my contributions to the Cthulhu mythos, the gods that I've invented for the Spectre Files. And so he sent me an email one day and showed me some of the art, and I was blown away. I thought, wow, that's so cool. He did some stuff related to moments in those books involving some of the characters too, like Mo Ramirez. And I thought, wow, we've got to do something with this. So we thought for a little while that it would be an art project of a limited edition set of prints that would come in folders, file folders, because they're the Spectra files, and we were going to have one set of illustrations for each book done on really nice paper. He got involved in an animation project, and things just we kept in touch, but it kind of fell apart. And then I thought, well, I've got all this art that I'm sitting on that's just amazing, and it's almost like tarot deck of my Lovecraftian pantheon and things I've done with Lovecraft's own pantheon, and there must be some way to write a story around this. And Matt had suggested maybe that I write something to do with Jack Parsons at some point. We in our conversations talked about what an interesting figure he was for something Lovecraftian. So I wrote the novella with the art in mind, and found ways to weave that into the story, that these are actually drawings done by Jack Parsons' lover Marjorie Cameron, who was an actual artist who did some very beautiful and unsettling occult art in her lifetime. So that gave me an angle for kind of tying everything together, which was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun to come across those. I wasn't expecting it, honestly, because I didn't read what the book was about on Amazon or anything where it mentions that there's some illustrations. So I just got it and read it, and suddenly there's all these illustrations. So I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Cool. Yeah, we worked in ciphers. Matt came up with this whole cipher system where there's an English alphabet key for it in the book. There's two of them, actually. Yeah, so I had written, before even writing the novel, I had written some prophetic verses and incantations and things, clues that if a reader takes the time to actually decipher some of the runes that are in the illustrations, you get these poetic pieces of the puzzle that some of them play into the Red Equinox story, because some of this is prophetic. So yeah, a lot of little Easter eggs in there.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier on in this interview that you're working on something now. Is it anything you can talk about?
I have have a new novel that I've been shopping around, trying to hopefully connect it with a bigger publisher. We'll see. Wish me luck. Fingers crossed. That one is a kind of mainstream horror thriller that deals with technology, and it's called His Own Devices. It's about a boy who gets involved in a relationship with a psychotic YouTube celebrity through the video gaming community.
Cool.
And so there's a lot of ambiguous horror and questions of who is pulling the strings behind this internet celebrity. It may be Russians, it may be occultists, it may be there may be a supernatural angle. So this young mother is increasingly terrified as she discovers what her son's gotten involved in. This real world game that evolves out of a video game. So that's my latest unpublished novel. But then I am starting work on a new novel that I think of as it's kind of like The Shining on a cruise ship with a dash of Jaws. So
Interesting.
we'll see.
I like the change of pace. I really like. I had to laugh at the crazy YouTuber, because I'm a YouTuber and there's some crazy mofo's out there.
Yeah, there are. My son watches some of them. He's pretty good about finding smart stuff, but yeah, you got to wonder.
Yeah,
who these people are.
So, do you have anything that is coming out that we can look forward to?
There are a couple of short stories that are tied up in various stages with people I can't really talk about yet, but the one thing I know is scheduled to come out sometime in 2020 is a novella called The Wind in My Heart, and that will be published by Crystal Lake.
Oh, very cool.
And yeah, I'm very excited to work with them. It's also somewhat historical. It takes place in 1990s New York City, when there was a lot of Chinatown gang war going on, and my protagonist, a private detective, gets involved in he gets hired by Tibetan monks in New York City to search for what they believe is the reincarnation of a monk who over-identified with a demonic force and is now possibly a serial killer running rampant in Chinatown. So part crime novel, part supernatural thriller.
That's awesome. So we can look forward to that in 2020?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, one more question before I let you go. Where can listeners find you online?
I am at Doug Wynne, WYNNE.com. Douglas Wynne was taken by an actor, so but I go by Doug with my friends. So yeah, DougWynne.com. I'm pretty busy on Facebook. My page is mostly just to be able to run the occasional ad, but you can send me a friend request on Facebook to my personal account. I have a lot of stupid political commentary that I do there, and also I'm on Twitter, all the usual places, Goodreads, Instagram. Just search by my name.
Very, very awesome. All right, well, I can call you Doug, right?
You bet.
All right, so thank you very much, Doug, for coming on. I had an absolute blast
Thank you, Jason.
talking with you.
That was a great interview. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
And we're definitely going to have you on again in the future.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Pain has a face. Allow me to show it to you. Gentlemen, I am pain.
I see dead people. Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Michael, he is having some computer issues, among other things, and so I thought I'd do this by myself, and I came up with a pretty cool idea, and so I'm just going to go with it, and this is the top 5 cosmic horror movies according to according to Darkness Dwells. And so let's get right into it. I have the 5 here. And the list is kind of long because I thought that I would add some things that I've been enjoying lately in doing when we do the movie reviews, which includes the IMDb movie trivia bits. So let's get into it. In at number 5, I have The Mist. This is directed by Frank Darabont and written by Frank Darabont, and it's based on the Stephen King novella, as you guys probably know. It stars Thomas Jane, Marcia Gay Harden, Laurie Holden, among many others. The brief synopsis is: a freak storm unleashes a species of bloodthirsty creatures on a small town, where a small band of citizens hole up in a supermarket and fight for their lives. Now, this movie, I've enjoyed the novella by Stephen King, and this movie actually follows it pretty closely, and I really enjoyed this movie. It's fantastic. Now, moving on to some fun trivia, Stephen King says that he was genuinely frightened by this adaptation of his novella. Frank Darabont described that as his happiest moment of his career, which I guess so. Stephen King got the idea for this Stephen King got the idea for the source novel novella, it should say, when he was in a Maine market. When he noticed the front window was made of plate glass, he wondered what would happen if giant insects flew into it. As if you're Stephen King, you would wonder about that. Next little bit of or a golden nugget of trivia I have here. This is the third film Frank Darabont has adapted from Stephen King's work. The other two are Shawshank Redemption from 1994 and The Green Mile from 1999. In at number 4, I have Annihilation. This is directed by Alex Garland, is written by Alex Garland, and based on Jeff Vandermeer's novel. Excuse me, it stars Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Tessa Thompson, and many other people. And the short synopsis is: a biologist turns up for a dangerous secret expedition into a mysterious zone where the laws of nature don't apply. So I saw this one in the theater, and I absolutely love this film because it's very much weird fiction. You could even argue it's very much a Lovecraftian tale as well. And I enjoyed this movie to death. And, it maybe should have made number 1 with the way I'm going on about it now. So let's move on to some fun trivia. Due to a poorly received test screening, David Ellison, a financier at Paramount, became concerned that the film was too intellectual and too complicated and demanded changes to make it appeal to a wider audience, including making Portman's character more sympathetic and changing the ending. Producer Scott Rudin sided with Garland in this desire to not alter the film, defending the film and refusing to take notes. Rudin had the final cut, so that's pretty cool. Usually that happens in the complete opposite way. Usually when people who are financing the film and they say this needs changes or we're not releasing it, the movie makers comply with that. But these guys didn't, and that's awesome. Next little bit here. Oscar Isaac and Sonia Mitsuno previously starred together in Ex Machina from 2014, which was also written and directed by Alex Garland. The character names in this film, Ventress, Thorensen, Radek, and Shepard, are identical to those in the novel, The Crystal World by J.G. Ballard. In the novel, a physician takes a journey through Africa. Notably, it is described that the forest and its inhabitants start to crystallize, and at the end of the film, the lighthouse is surrounded by crystal trees. So there's some interesting things there. In at number 3, I have Event Horizon from 1997. This is directed by Paul W.S. Anderson as Paul Anderson, and it's written by Philip Eisner. It stars Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, Kathleen Quinlan, and, as you guessed, many others. The short synopsis is a rescue crew investigates a spaceship that disappeared into a black hole and has now returned with someone or something new on board. I love this film because it has that sort of creepy, ship that's been gone a long time suddenly reappears, and it's haunted by something. This movie is a lot of fun, and that ending is just, it's all kinds of fucked up. Now, for some fun trivia, Paul Anderson's initial cut of the film ran 130 minutes and was quite graphically violent, so much so that both test audiences and the studio balked at the finished product. Paramount ordered the film cut by 30 minutes to tone down the film and some of the violence, a decision he now regrets. Although it was announced in 2012 that a full version of the film had been found, Anderson revealed in 2017 that due to bad archiving, a longer version no longer exists. And that's really sad. I would like to see exactly what was in those 30 minutes. You think that they would have been able to archive that just a bit better. Moving on, the script originally described the Gateway machine as a smooth and featureless black orb, 10 meters, nearly 33 feet in diameter, suspended in midair between large rotating mechanical arms. It also said to contain a stable black hole within it at all times, which the ship used as a power source, as opposed to briefly creating a temporary one. Paul Anderson decided to redesign it to involve interlocking circles as a homage, or an homage to the puzzle box in Hellraiser, and you can kind of see that a little bit. It made me think of it anyway. And that movie served as an inspiration to this film, which, if you know what I'm talking about, and that nastiness there at the end, that's definitely Hellraiser material. And also, the model of the Event Horizon includes a complete X-Wing from Star Wars as part of the antenna array. The model is visible on the lower portion of the Event Horizon during the first flyby, and by Lewis and Clark. I don't understand that very last part, but I haven't seen this. I'm going to have to rewatch this film just to see if I can spot that. The Event Horizon was named after the theoretical boundary surrounding a black hole, within which gravitational attraction is so great that nothing, not even radiation, can escape, because the escape velocity is greater than the speed of light. Technically, it is where the physical universe ends, and physical laws no longer apply. So the ship's name is symbolic for its journey beyond borders of the known universe, and that is what makes this movie such a fantastic one. Alright, in at number 2, I have The Mouth of Madness. This is from 1994, and it's directed by John Carpenter. It's written by Michael DeLuca, and it stars Sam Neill, Jürgen Prochnow, I probably pronounced that wrong, I'm sorry, and Julie Carmen, among others. Short synopsis: an insurance investigator begins discovering that the impact a horror writer's books have on his fans is more than inspirational. Much more. Fun fact, or fun trivia: the building used as the mental institute at the beginning of the film is actually a water filtration plant in the beaches area of Toronto. It has been the scene of other movies, including The Island Fortress and Undercover Brother from 2002. Filming can no longer take place inside this building following the September 11 terrorist attacks on the USA, which is interesting. In the film, the works of Sutter Kane are occasionally quoted. Most, if not all, these quotes are actually taken directly from several of H.P. Lovecraft's short stories, with some adaptations to fit them into the film story. Most notably, the scene where Styles reads to Trent as he gazes into the abyss. Her speech lifts much of its description, including the elements as the illimitable gulf of the unknown, from the last few paragraphs of Lovecraft's The Rats in the Walls. In an earlier scene as well, Trent reads a line verbatim from Lovecraft's The Haunter in the Dark, in reference to the Black Church being the seat of an evil older than mankind and wider than the known universe. The wall of monsters at the end was not several monsters being controlled individually. Instead, it was one single special effect that was attached to a vehicle-like wheelbase and had to be pushed along with a crank. During the filming of this scene, the wall of monsters accidentally ran over Greg Nicotero's foot and he had to be taken to a nearby hospital. In at number 1, I have another John Carpenter film, and that is The Thing from 1982. Now, this will probably top a lot of my personal top 10 or top 5 horror film lists, because I'm not too hesitant to say that this is my favorite film of all time. So, as you may or may not know, this film, The Thing, was directed by John Carpenter. It was written by Bill Lancaster, based off the John W. Campbell's story. It stars Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, Keith David, and many others. Short synopsis is a research team in Antarctica is hunted by a shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims. Excuse me. Fun trivia. This movie has become part of the culture in Antarctica, which is interesting. It is a long-standing tradition in all British Antarctic research stations to watch The Thing as part of their midwinter feast and celebration held every June 21st, which is kind of weird when you think of it. John Carpenter has stated that of all his films, this is his personal favorite, so I have something in common with John Carpenter. The film's considered a benchmark in special makeup effects. The effects were created by Rob Bottin, who was only 22 when he started the project. At around 15 minutes, and this part is interesting to me because I've tried to figure this out, and I don't know if this is a true trivia or not. I don't think anyone will ever be able to tell us. But anyways, at around the 15-minute mark, when the dog wanders down a hallway and pauses outside a door, we see a shadow of one of the men, beckoning it in. John Carpenter wanted it to be mysterious which character was involved, so they didn't use any of his actors to cast that shadow. This is interesting to me because, as I said, I've tried to figure this out, and I am certain that the silhouette belongs to Charles Hallahan, the guy who has a heart attack and his chest becomes a cavity with teeth that bites off the doctor's hands. I'm certain it's him. He's got the same shape of face. So I call bullshit on that. Alright, one more little fact, and then I'm going to wrap up everything here, and we can go home. Some scenes were shot with stop-motion animation, but John Carpenter rejected them because they looked too fake. And I could see that. Stop-motion animation has come a long way since 1982, and the stop-motion back then would have really taken the reality out of this film, I think. Alright, so there is Darkness Dwells Top 5 Cosmic Horror Films. Please, leave us a comment in any way, shape, or form that you can, and let us know what your top 5 cosmic horror films are, and let us know which ones you agree with and don't agree with here on this list. Alright, I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're going to return so that I can give you the information on how to contact us, and we will get the hell out of here. Alright, so thank you to everyone who listened to this episode. I want to thank Douglas Wynne for joining me and being very patient with me. This has been a pretty awesome ride for this episode, and I apologize to you, dear listener, for your patience. So if you guys want to get a hold of us, there's many ways to do so. We're online everywhere. You can find us at our website, which is wheredarknessdwells.com. You can reach us on Facebook. We have a page you can like and a group you can join and create a discussion if you wish. You can reach us on Twitter, where our handle is at darkdweller74, and you can send us an email at darknessdwellspodcast@mail.com. Thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned. We are going to be back shortly with some new interviews and some new movies to discuss, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So as my co-host Michael enjoys saying at this point in time of the show, stay dark, my friends.